we'll continue our discussion of rapid chain. So last time we said that we use proof of work followed by PBFT. Sorry, not PBFT, but a BFT protocol. And the advantage of the BFT protocol is that you can have larger block sizes. You don't have to worry about things like forking, right? But the tricky part was, how do we ensure that the number of Byzantine nodes is less than whatever threshold that BFT tolerates? And that we said we can do if we ensure that like suppose we say that 50%, less than 50% of the nodes have to be Byzantine. Well, if we have somewhat less than 50% among this set of nodes which are participating here, then with high probability these nodes which are selected are going to be less, or the Byzantine nodes selected are going to be less than the threshold allowed by this BFT protocol, right? So let's go into a few of the details. So there are a number of shards in the system, and the first is the reference shard. So out of all the participants, suppose that there are initially n participants. Out of those, roughly root n are chosen, and these are the members of this particular reference shard. Okay, so this is a much smaller number than the original number of participants. Okay. So they will have their own shard, and they can use whatever protocol is appropriate. For example, a BFT type protocol, right? So the thing is, this is a crucial shard, and at least from what I understood in the paper, the membership is not changed. It is kept the same throughout time. So it wasn't clear from the paper whether proof of work is also used here. It would make sense to use it, but from what I saw in the paper, I didn't see them using proof of work to actually generate this particular shard. They have a special bootstrapping protocol. Which is actually described towards the end of the paper in section 5.1. So this is used. It's a tricky protocol, but it uses actually certain graph theoretic methods. Okay, but essentially. It ensures that the fraction of Byzantine nodes is almost the same in this set as it was in the initial set. Okay, so one of the issues that they discuss in their paper is that initially you need some sort of randomness, uh, even if you want to do proof of work, right? And they were saying that how do you do that in practice? So it's sort of like Satoshi for Bitcoin. He was the only one in the beginning. I mean, and he was honest, and so I mean, he just generated a whole bunch of blocks which people accepted. But if you are creating a new system and there are lots of people initially involved, then how do you have something that is really random, so that it's so that nobody has an unfair advantage over the others, right? So that's sort of the issue that they're trying to solve with this bootstrapping problem. And they show that for whatever if you have n participants, there's a method to choose square root of n, order of square root of n out of those, to such that you do it in a random enough fashion so that the fraction of the smaller set, which is Byzantine, is similar to the fraction in the original set. Okay, but let's assume that we have this reference shard. Then what are we going to do? So this reference shard is going to add blocks over time, and the information here is about who are the selected nodes. So the information would be the nodes selected by proof of work for each epoch. Okay, so this is like sort of like the registry that we had in mitosis. This is a trusted chain with a fairly large number of members. So we saw that for the other shards we are going to have much smaller sets. Okay, but here we have around square root of n number of nodes, and they are going to sort of record who are the nodes who are allowed to maintain the other shards or store information for other shards. Okay. So let's just write what the other shards are. So this reference shard doesn't really have transactions. It just have nodes or public keys of nodes who have successfully solved proof of work puzzles, right? And of course we'll have to figure out which of those nodes are going to go to which shard. Okay, but suppose we have these various shards 1, 2, 3 and so on. Okay. So let's say that there are various epochs of time. Now let's say that there is some genesis block. So we have a blockchain here and a certain number of blocks, let's say, generated over time, right? And similar for all of these. So we'd have k of these. So k is equal to n divided by m, right? And we said that we're going to set m is equal to 20 log n. Okay, so in each, what happens in each epoch? So we want to modify, when we go from one epoch to the next, we want to modify the set of nodes which do consensus. Okay, and there's going to be some modification when we go from this epoch to here. Okay. Also, what we are going to do is that we are going to allow the, let's say, new nodes, if they want, to actually join, okay, and in order to do the consensus. Right, so of course in Satoshi's case there is no epoch as such. Somebody can just stop their hashing or start doing hashing at any point in time, right? But here we are using some sort of BFT protocols, and so there are very well defined set of nodes which are going to do consensus in each epoch. But at the same time we want to allow new people to join and other people to leave, right? Because in order to make it a permissionless system. And which is why we have these epochs. So, right, so within an epoch, the set of nodes doing consensus on any shard is the same. But when you move from one epoch to the other, we are allowed to make changes. Okay. So what happens in an epoch? Okay, so let's say that this is an epoch that we are looking at. So in parallel, so there is BFT happening in each shard in order to do consensus for generating blocks. But at the same time, let's say this is epoch I. So there is some randomness, random number Ri generated by the reference shard. Okay, so these particular nodes which are handling the reference shard will among themselves create a random number, some Ri, right? And this is given as input to the proof of work puzzle. Sort of, it's like a nonce, you can say. Okay, and okay, any particular nodes would try to solve this particular POW puzzle. So let's say for some particular period, they say something like 10 minutes. Anyone can try to solve the POW puzzle. And after this time period, they can submit solutions to CR. They submit the solutions and public keys to the reference shard. Okay, so the CR is the set of nodes which is maintaining this particular reference shard. Okay. So only these nodes are going to be allowed to do consensus in the next epoch. Okay, so this is epoch I plus 1. So CR is going to generate Ri plus 1. Okay. and these nodes, these are allowed to do consensus for various other shards. So let's assume that most of the nodes are going to use the same public keys. Okay, at least that's what you would want. Okay, and if the public key is the same, then you would normally keep the shard, the mapping of the public key to the shard the same, and for the most part, right? And of course there are few people who have submitted new public keys, then those would have to be assigned to some particular shards in some particular way. Okay, but this is a basic procedure. Every time a new random number is generated by the reference shard, and that is fed to the POW puzzle for the, which is going to choose people who will do consensus in the next epoch. One question which we are yet to answer is how to assign nodes to committees. So suppose somebody has solved a puzzle and it has given a public key PKI, right? Or let's just call it PKJ. This is for node J. Okay. We need to assign it now to a particular committee, right? So let's see how to do that. So suppose it's a new PKI, and let's say that this is not seen before. So what we are going to do is PKJ, right? What we are going to do is we are going to combine it with the nonce, and this we are going to send through a hash function. So this is just concatenation. We're going to send it through a hash function, and suppose this hash is mapping to somewhere between 0 and 1. So let's write 0, 1 in this fashion, and suppose we divide that into k different sectors. Okay, so suppose PKJ gets mapped over here. Okay. So all the nodes which get mapped here would be in shard 1. Okay, these would be in shard 2 and so on. Okay, and here it so happens that this particular public key is mapped to this should be Ri, not Rj. So this is an epoch I. So here this particular node gets mapped to shard 3. Right, so this is for new nodes we are going to do this, and if the public key was seen earlier, we keep the shard the same. Okay, so let's just write this down. This is for a new node, and here by new it doesn't mean a new person, it's just a new public key which was used. Okay, and of course an adversary or somebody else, even an honest node, can try to change its public key. Right? It might solve the puzzle the next time in the next epoch with a new public key. Right? So if it's a new public key, then this is the procedure. Okay, and this we are saying this is in epoch I. This is what we do, right? Okay. What if it is an old node? Okay, so we just maintain, we just keep the same node in the same committee. Okay, so for example, this is an epoch I, this pkj was assigned to shard 3. In the next epoch also it will remain in shard 3 and so on, right? And so what is the idea over here? Why are we doing this? So we don't want to unnecessarily keep changing the shards of everyone, because there is an overhead, right? If you shift a particular node from one shard to the other, then it has to collect all the data of the other shard and so on. Okay, so we don't want nodes to keep shifting shards. And so besides just storing new data, they also have to retrieve data from the new shard, right? So you would like the committees to be more or less the same, but this allows an attacker. So what an attacker could do is that he could try to potentially use different public keys and try to get his particular nodes into the same shard, so that he exceeds the Byzantine fraction expected by the protocol, right? So this is called a leave and join attack. So use a new public key and try to get all your nodes into the same committee, right? So something like this could be done. So they allow this to happen. So we are assuming that within a particular epoch everything remains fixed, right? Because the adversary, or in fact everybody else, has already been assigned to committees. But the next time the adversary could try to change his public keys and push all his nodes into a particular shard. So what the authors propose, so the authors propose something called a cuckoo rule. So what they propose is that a small subset of nodes in every committee are reassigned randomly to other committees in every epoch. So to other committees randomly. Right, so there's some rearrangement which is allowed over here. So maybe the attacker gets some of his nodes into a particular committee, but maybe some of them might get kicked out, right? So under certain limitations for this leave and join attack, right, this is going to take care of ensuring that the Byzantine nodes, the set of Byzantine nodes remains below a threshold. Okay, so this is what they propose, and they have many such small optimizations which they do in their paper, right? So, but at a high level, what we are doing is first we create this reference shard and the reference committee. So the reference committee is going to do the assignment of nodes to other shards. So what I have shown over here, this is done by the reference committee. I should just write here. So the reference committee CR is going to do this, right? So various nodes are going to submit their POW solutions to the reference committee. The reference committee does this mapping, and it will list in its block, finally after all this mapping, it will list the current committees or the public keys for all the committees for the various shards, right? And in the next epoch, some of them are going to get kicked out by the cuckoo rule elsewhere in order to take care of these leave and join attacks, right? And of course, new people who join will also have to be assigned to various shards, right? Okay, so this is done, and of course we have to assume that the fraction of Byzantine nodes in each committee is less than what the protocol is going to assume for that particular shard. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about cross-shard transactions. So what Rapidchain assumes is a UTXO model, just like we have in Bitcoin. So you have inputs and outputs. And of course in Bitcoin you had to say which particular UTXO you were taking as input. You have to point to the transaction in the past, right? And the transactions could be anywhere, right? These would have to point to outputs of transactions far back or somewhere earlier in the blockchain, right? Now the issue could be that it's possible that these might be in different shards. This is just an example. So this is, let's say, in shard I. Let's call this I1, and this is in shard I2, and let's say this is in shard O. Okay, some O for output. Let's just call it shard out. Okay. So now this is an issue. I mean, the tricky part is how are we going to do all of this together? I mean, if you put this in shard out, how do you know that this UTXO has not already been spent, let's say, in these other input shards? Okay, so there could be I1, some particular shard, and I2. Right. And somewhere else there is shard, I'm just calling it out. So you want to take money from two different shards and put it in a third shard. Right? So suppose, of course, this is a typical example where you have two inputs and one output, and we'd have to wonder what if there is more than two outputs, right? But you can extend the idea. So let's just look at two inputs and one output. Okay. So what are we going to do over here? Okay. So this transaction is going to be given to the committee. Let's call this C out. These are the committees. So first, this is transaction, let's call this TX. TX is given to C out, okay, because the money is going to be in this shard, right? After, suppose this transaction gets through, the money is going to be here, right? And of course, how is this output shard decided? Well, it really depends on the where this is mapped. So there is a mapping method which decides which particular shard it has to go in. Okay, and of course where it is taking, so that's what decides this, right? And typically they say this could be like the transaction ID. I mean, you could take the hash of this, for example, and that would give you the transaction ID, right? But there is some mapping method which decides which particular shard should record this transaction. Okay, so suppose we take the transaction ID, so that's the person generating this transaction knows which committee to give this transaction to, right? And of course he's using money from some transactions which are already there in the blockchains, and they happen to be in shards I1 and I2. So this transaction is given to C out by the creator of the transaction. So this shard cannot directly put the transaction in, because it has to inform these two shards that these are no longer UTXOs, right? That the money has been spent. Okay, so first this transaction is given by the creator of this transaction to C out. Now C out creates three transactions. So C out can't directly put this transaction in its own blockchain because I mean the money is still there in the other blockchain. So somehow these other two blockchains first have to mark these as no longer being UTXOs, these inputs, right? Before C out can actually include that in its own chain, right? So C out is going to create three transactions. Okay, so first of all, let's say that these are inputs I1 and this is input I2, right? So it's going to first of all create one transaction which would be put in this shard. Okay, and this is sent to the committee in which let's say this particular input is located in. So it is sent to CI1 and it creates another transaction I2 to I2 dash, and this is sent to CI2. Right? Okay, and it's also going to create a transaction which has I1 dash and I2 dash, and this is going to be sent to let's say the I out. Okay, and this is created in such a way that it is meant for this output shard. Okay, so this is what is done, but of course this third transaction cannot be included right away. You want these two to be committed to their appropriate input shards, right? So essentially this is going to transfer money to this other account, right? And similarly here too, and these two are going to be put together and sent to I out. Okay. So what happens after this? See, I1 and see I2 first commit their transactions. So that's the first two over here, and inform C out, right? And after this takes place, this third transaction is committed to this output shard, right? And this is of course the same output as the main transaction. Okay, so what I didn't see in the paper is that what happens if this breaks halfway, right? So suppose this one commits but not this one, then what's going to happen? Right? Is there a way to roll back or something like that, right? So there should be such a mechanism, but I didn't see the reasoning given. Maybe it's hidden somewhere in a very large paper that it is. Right? Okay, but it's non-trivial to do a cross-shard transaction because it's not atomic. You are sort of expecting several different things to happen one after the other for this transaction to actually get through, right? And if it's not atomic, then something can go wrong in between all these steps, and then what happens? Ideally you should have a way of rolling back, right? A last topic I wanted to discuss in rapid chain is how to do consensus within a particular shard. So we're looking at a single shard, and the various epochs right, and the committee changes from one epoch to the next. It could change slightly. And this is because of the cuckoo rule. Right, you don't want to change it too much, but if you allow an adversary to join and leave, then you have to do a little bit of rearrangement to ensure that he doesn't actually have too much of control over any particular committee. Right? So within an epoch, when there are many blocks generated like this, and how are we going to generate blocks over there? How are we going to deal with consensus? Okay. So what the authors propose is the following. So you have for every block, let's say for generating a block, okay, so all the committee members know who the others are, at least they know the public keys, right? And from those public keys, they use some method to randomly choose a leader. And now what happens is that the leader is going to propose a block. This is a block with a whole set of transactions, and it doesn't have to be a very small block because we don't have to worry about forks, right? We don't have to worry about network propagation leading to forks and so on. There is only a single person who is allowed to create the block, and he creates a block and sends it to the other people, right? So what can go wrong here? So he might, if he's malicious, he might send different blocks to different committee members. And that's why we need to have subsequent rounds, just like in PBFT. So all nodes, at least if they are honest, they need to do this. So all nodes are going to echo what they heard. From the leader. Okay. So we are going to assume that all of these are synchronous. Okay, which means that everybody hears everybody else in a fixed time. So this is a known time. Okay, so let's say in a certain time delta, okay, everybody hears the leader, whatever the leader sent. Then in the next delta, they echo what they heard, and everybody hears everybody else within that delta. Okay, so PBFT, of course, doesn't assume this synchronous behavior. It can consider an asynchronous system, and it ensures that you have safety when you have an asynchronous system. So here we are assuming that all messages get through in a fixed time, let's say some delta. So this is over in delta. And similarly for this and so on, right? So this helps us reach consensus in a few rounds, and you can have up to 50% Byzantine nodes with this protocol, right? PBFT, of course, assumes less than 1/3. Okay. So how is this going to work? So really after this step 3, everybody has heard what everybody else has heard. At least all honest nodes have heard what all other honest nodes have heard. Okay, that much we are sure. So if the adversary has proposed multiple blocks, they would get to know that over here. So now what do they do in this particular round? So actually the numbering is a little bit different in the paper. So in the paper they talk about this as a separate, let's say separate phase. Maybe let's also call this phase 1 and this is phase 2. Okay. So let's just rewrite this as 1, 2 and 3. Okay, so these are synchronous rounds. And this is round 1, round 2, round 3. So what do they do in round 3? If an honest node receives more than one block, okay, when it's heard everything, if it hears that the leader has been cheating, then it's going to send a dummy, a sort of default block indicating that something was wrong, right? That the leader was cheating. So if the honest node hears more than one block, in round 2, okay. So what it does, it sends out a dummy block indicating that the block is pending. Let's call it pending block. Right, and now all honest nodes are going to hear this, right? So in the final round, which is the 4th round, suppose an honest node has not heard anything but only the original single block proposed by the leader. So suppose it has only heard a single block BI, till now, and it has heard this from MF plus 1 nodes, okay, including itself. So what is F? So F is equal to half. Here you can allow up to half Byzantine nodes. Okay, so at least half of the nodes you have heard from, and so it gossips this particular block. So it gossips the echoes that it heard and it accepts the block. Okay, so because all of this is synchronous, we are in luck because everybody is going to hear all these echoes, and it's possible to prove that the attacker will not be able to break this protocol, right? So there are this many echoes that he has heard. Okay, he has not heard anybody saying that they have heard anything other than this single block, right? So everybody, all the honest people of course are going to speak up in every round. Okay, and he has heard enough honest people saying that they got this BI, right? So he accepts this particular block, adds it to his chain, and he tells everybody. So he actually tells people the various echoes. That means everything from round 2 okay, and all the messages are signed. We have to keep that in mind. So these echoes which he is going to forward, they are also signed, and they are the full echo which he received. So suppose node 1 in the committee has heard from node 2 that he got block BI. That particular message is signed by node 2, right? So when he gossips the echoes, he's going to gossip that signature as well, right? And thanks to these synchronous rounds where everybody hears everybody else in every round, you can be sure after this 4th round that no other particular block is going to be committed by anybody else. Okay. So these are just some of the details in rapid chain. Many other things are considered over here, mainly from a either from a performance point of view or a security point of view, with small optimizations made here and there. Right, but the main ideas of rapid chain are the following. So you want to use not POW everywhere, you want to use it to create identities, create nodes whom you can distribute among various shards. But thereafter you want to use a BFT protocol so that you don't have to worry about forks and things like that. And you can safely assume that once a block is committed, it's committed forever, right? With very, very high probability, or assuming that with very low probability an attacker is going to be able to exceed the Byzantine fraction that the protocol is going to assume, right? So you can do things like cross shard transactions by splitting up a transaction into multiple ones. You send small parts of the transaction, sort of some new transactions, to the input shards, and if those are committed in the input shards, you can sort of transfer the money in the output shard appropriately, right? So this is rapid chain. It's a interesting idea, and this is in a permissionless system, unlike mitosis, which was for a permissioned system.